Thank you. Just a show of hands, how many people have heard of Deezer or used Deezer? Oh, great. For those of you who don't know, Deezer is the second largest music streaming service in the world. We're in 180 countries, and we have 16 million users. And what I'm going to talk about today is really how technology is changing our role as marketers, and it's actually making the marketing function more important than ever. But it also means that marketing in general will become more and more technical, and in order to adapt to this change, we need to sort of rethink how we do business as marketers, as well as cross-functionally. So we're basically entering an era where the era of the madman or the traditional marketer is becoming the math man or the data-driven marketer. And this doesn't mean that creativity goes away, and in fact it becomes more important, but we're kind of moving on to an era where we now have 1,000 different creative executions for 1,000 different targets, rather than a traditional execution where you have one or two executions and you launch that through a few channels. And really the turning point happened in the last 5 years. So we now have multiple channels where social media now determines how people talk about your brand. So marketers are no longer in one place, they're in every place. So that means that every possible touch point across the product and across channels becomes part of the marketer's domain. What that also means is now that we can measure everything that we do has increased focus on it, but it also gives us a lot more tools and technologies, so we can now determine what a lifetime value of a specific segment is, and what does that mean in terms of actually targeting different consumer segments real time. And this is my favorite quote about the future. It's from Ashu Garg. He's a partner at Foundation Capital. And really, the key takeaway is that the data nerd is going to be the CMO of the future. And that if we don't adapt as marketers, we will basically become irrelevant. It's a similar concept that we heard earlier from the Google presenter, that if we don't adapt and we are not mobile first enough, we will quickly become outmoded and miss the opportunity. And what this means also is that CMOs will now have more budget expertise and authority over CIOs. And so a Gartner study indicated that in 4 years, CMOs will be making more technology decisions than ever before, and those spends over budgets will become up to 10% of the marketer's budget. And what that means is that as marketers, we also become technologists, making important decisions about the future of the product and how we go to market. A Gartner survey also asked, what is the most important issue facing CEOs in the next 5 years? And those technology issues are actually the same technology issues that marketers are most responsible for. That includes e-commerce, data, and digital marketing, as well as the customer experience. So increasingly, marketers are now responsible for that end-to-end customer experience, and technology will really drive how we think about that experience. And I'm not going to talk too much about growth hacking. I think you guys have all heard about that as a concept. But what that means is marketing is now a technical discipline, and it's also a cross-functional discipline. So marketing is now working in cross-functional teams directly with developers across KPIs that are now much more integrated and bigger picture. So that means instead of specific metrics like downloads and registered users, we need to look at things like what's our top-line growth and what's our overall customer satisfaction. And increasingly, sometimes those metrics have been in the domain of product management. They're now in the domain of marketing management. And it also means that marketers are also that advocate for the full funnel. So that's everything from acquisition to churn reduction. And the key will be really driving insights around that to develop better experiences. Consumption around media itself is changing rapidly. So the new consumer is going to spend up to 360 minutes a day on mobile, and over 80% of that consumption will be digital-based. And music, kind of my domain, is really the poster child of how that consumer and consumption shift is happening. So 70% of people are streaming today. Over 74% of that happens on a mobile device, and that consumption has increased 55% year over year. And what we're really seeing is that record companies are now becoming digital companies, digital entertainment companies, and physical CDs, as well as even physical downloads, are being eclipsed by the cloud, which creates a completely new consumer experience that, as marketers, we need to understand, because a lot of those traditional physical ways of reaching out to users are changing and creating multiple ways to interact with consumers. And how we do that is also rapidly changing. So most of you have probably heard about programmatic marketing. Many of you probably do some level of programmatic marketing. And really, the prediction is that within 5 years, most media buying will actually be programmatic. So a good example is American Express is now reaching out to different agencies and asking them to basically give them a world where everything that they're buying from a media perspective is programmatically driven. And what this also means is that as marketers, we need to create these multiple use cases and creatives, and also develop smart targeting strategies around that. And this is probably a joke that you can only make at a marketing conference around programmatic marketing. And I don't know if you watch Jimmy Kimmel. He's a popular comedian in the States. And basically, like all things, making fun of a lot of the buzzwords that are driving a lot of the things that we're thinking about. And he calls programmatic buying the gluten of buzzwords. So it's something that we all know is important, but it's not necessarily something that we know a lot about. And I think overall, that will be the key as marketers to really understand how do you take these buzzwords and really translate that into action. So I sort of have a list of tips and wisdom for navigating this future. So the first one is that the ad tech space changes every 6 months. So don't think about things as constant. They're always static. So you might get false negatives when you test things early on, but consider retesting those in the future. So a good example of that is mobile retargeting might be something that you've done 6 months ago and you determined that it didn't have a really good ROI. I'd encourage you to relook at those, because a lot of that technology is changing, and it's changing very quickly. Set aside 10 to 15% of your marketing budgets to test, and particularly if you're more mobile-oriented, this becomes more helpful. And this is something that I've always done, and it keeps you really abreast of how things are changing. It also helps you find those components of your marketing mix that you can improve. Give growth teams. Now, I don't know how many people have growth teams, so if you don't have a growth team, consider developing one. If you do have a growth team, a lot of the flaws that I've seen in this space is that the growth teams don't necessarily have development resources at their disposal, so they're still stuck in the product pipeline cycle. So in order to do growth effectively, make sure that these teams are empowered. So if you're on a team or you're working with a team, those are things to flag to make sure that those are working effectively. Also, in this era where we're now signing up vendors and making big technology decisions, use your organization to your advantage. So partner with your CIO. Talk about whether you should build or buy with your product organization. Many times there is a strategy to build everything in-house. And my sort of tip would be that really focus on what your core competency is. And so if you need to move fast in a market, it's more important that you outsource things that aren't core to competing in that product, and that can include email or push notifications, and really focus on what you do well as a product. The other thing is get attribution modeling right, and the rest will follow. And this is a place that still plagues many marketers, even in this era where we think we can track things. So my tip there would be look at making sure that your attribution models are correct, and also think about multi-attribution and getting that right. The good example I always use here is that retargeting tends to be a double counting of a lot of your other metrics. And so sometimes you could look at metrics that suggest that has a really good ROI, but once you actually get your attribution modeling correct and you actually account for all your marketing mix elements, you'll see that that's not necessarily the case. And finally, nurture in-house expertise around these core areas. Don't necessarily delegate these technology issues to agencies, which is the temptation when a lot of bigger companies encounter something new. So this includes things like mobile marketing, SEO. It's really important to, again, think about talent and hiring from outside and really getting that mix right, so that you're leveraging your agency for other things, and or you're leveraging agencies to get more sophisticated expertise in boutique areas around what's really changing. So that's really my overall talk, and hopefully that's valuable. I think we're entering a unique era of marketing, and I think it's a really exciting time to be a marketer, and so I encourage you to keep an open mind and test, and you'll learn a lot. Thank you.